Hello and welcome. This is Chris Roberts with Iatric Systems, and I'll be your moderator today. If you should need any technical assistance during the webinar, please refer to the information located in the questions section of the control panel, and my name and contact information are there for you. We encourage you to participate in today's webinar by entering any questions or comments in the questions section, and you may enter your questions at any time during the webinar, and we'll stop periodically to address those. For quality purposes, this webinar will be recorded, and then after the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to fill out a short survey to tell us how we did. This survey will appear when you leave the webinar. For your time, your name will be entered into a drawing to win a $100 Amazon gift card. All those drawings are held at the end of each month. We really appreciate you joining us for today's presentation, how MEDITECH hospitals can meet the new eCQM reporting requirements using QRDA. Our speaker today is Cindy Paul. Cindy, a registered nurse with over 20 years experience in clinical nursing and public health education, is a consultant in our professional services division at Iatric Systems. She's experienced in hospital compliance and quality improvement, including meaningful use and audit readiness. Cindy's primary role at Iatric Systems is clinical consulting and project management for CMS quality initiatives. So now I'll turn it over to Cindy to get us started.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. So today we're going to talk about the regulations for meeting your electronic CQM submissions. So as you'll see on the agenda, we're first going to talk about, is your hospital really ready? Have you already implemented this process for 2016? And, talk about some of the challenges that you potentially have faced with that. I'm going to also mention some of the new information released by CMS as far as some of the regulatory changes for submissions. We'll also talk about what currently exists for the regulations and then discuss some things that we're hearing that could potentially change in the future. I'm going to go through the process for creating the QRDA Category 1 file in your MEDITECH system, and then also ensuring that that QRDA file meets the CMS compliance with your validation and testing process. And then lastly, we'll talk about how you can tackle this challenge and getting everyone on the same page within your organization. So first of all, aligning the quality reporting programs took place in 2016. So CMS introduced this alignment of the EHR incentive program with the inpatient quality reporting program. This change also brought about a really significant requirement where the patient data was required to be captured in an electronic format during the patient's stay. So we are really moving away from the chart abstraction. So capturing the data prior to the patient's discharge and then having the ability to produce the required data format and submit that electronically. On the bottom of the page, you'll also see there's a link for the cms.gov website. And this link will provide lots of information as far as the EHR incentive program, as well as clinical quality measure reporting using eCQMs. There are also some links there for looking at the new specifications that were released for 2017. So I really encourage you to look at that website and really use all the information. So let's talk about some of the recent updates for reporting. You may have heard recently that CMS has extended the reporting deadline for 2016. So for 2016 requirements, it was to submit data for 90 days or a single quarter, and the deadline was February 28th of 2017, but they've extended that a couple of weeks to March 13th. So many hospitals are still needing some of that extra time as they're working through the testing and validation process. So just take note of that they did sort of give you an extra couple of weeks just if needed. Another thing I want to bring note is we're expecting a proposed IPPS rule in the late spring, And part of this proposed rule will discuss some of the potential changes that we can expect for calendar year 2017 reporting. So as you're aware, reporting for this year currently is started on January 1st. However, there's a proposal that they will reduce the reporting period to 90 days again, and then also they're looking at decreasing the number of eCQMs that are required. This proposed rule will also address some challenges that hospitals are facing, particularly hospitals that are looking at transitioning or upgrading to new EHR systems. And then also, there are many workflows that are required to meet the eCQM requirements, and that can also really create challenges for facilities. So CMS is looking to address some of those challenges as well. So let's talk more about the alignment of the IQR and EHR incentive programs. Back in August of 2016, CMS released the final rule that we are now held to for 2017 reporting. So this requirement was to submit 8 of 15 available eCQMs, and CMS retired several CQMs that were used in the past and just reduced that down to 15. So a selection of 8 measures, and for 2017 reporting, the way it currently stands, it is to report 4 quarters of data, either on a quarterly, biannual, or annual basis. This will meet both the requirement for IQR and EHR incentive program. Now let me just explain a little bit about that. So this reporting for IQR on the quarterly, biannual, or annual basis, that is just your IQR eCQMs that submit to QualityNet. So in order to meet the dual submission requirement, when you go to a test for the EHR Meaningful Use Program, there will be a question that will simply ask you, did you submit your data through eCQMs through QualityNet? And you simply answer yes or no. By checking yes, then that validates or attests that you are submitting through the dual submission program, and you'll meet the requirements for both IQR and the EHR incentive programs. So I know it's a bit confusing because for IQR, you have an option to submit 3 different time periods, and for the EHR incentive program, it's simply the single attestation at the end of the year. Another part of something that I really wanted to make note of is critical access hospitals have not been required to do electronic CQMs. However, starting in 2018, all hospitals, including critical access hospitals, are required to begin the eCQM submission with IQR and EHR incentive program. So these hospitals will no longer have the option of doing the 16 manual CQMs through the EHR program. And then also, as you're aware, all eCQM reporting must be produced out of a certified EHR technology. Now, something else that I wanted to just kind of briefly mention about the alignment of programs, the Joint Commission is also looking at considering adopting the same reporting requirements as CMS. So I encourage you to, if you are accredited by the Joint Commission and you're held by those reporting standards, I would encourage you to reach out to them and find out what the differences are. It's not simply a single QRDA file. They have some other requirements in addition to that. So that's the way it stands today. However, they are making considerations to adopt the same guidelines that are set forth by CMS currently. Here I just wanted to list briefly, just so that you had for your reference, the CQMs that were retired. So you'll see that several of the AMI and SCIP VTE measures, several of those were retired and will no longer be moving forth in 2017 and future years. Now this slide I actually just took straight from CMS. This is all of the eCQMs that are available, the 15 measures that are available for you to select from. Now, it is very important to select measures that are applicable to your patient population and what works for your hospital workflow. So from these 15, for 2017, you're required to select 8 measures. And so just for instance, if your hospital does not admit pediatric patients, then it really wouldn't be appropriate to select the CAC-3 or the Home Management Plan of Care for pediatric patients with asthma plan of care. So that's just one example, is you definitely want to be diligent in selecting measures that are really applicable to your patient population. And then also, you know, quality departments are really looking at measures that they want to start developing quality improvement programs for, and so that data is very important to those folks. Now, just to also make note, for this year, for 2016, 2017, your scores are not being reported to Hospital Compare. So there are no thresholds to meet. CMS is simply wanting to know, did you have the ability to capture the data electronically during the patient's stay, as well as submit that data meeting the QRDA Category 1 specifications. So there's no data to report to Hospital Compare, and CMS has not released any information as far as when they will start that. Right now, they're just wanting to establish baseline, and that will be used to establish future thresholds in the future. Now, also know that a zero denominator is okay. So if you're selecting measures that apply to your patient facility, let me just go back to this slide here. So you'll see that there are several stroke measures that you can select from. So even if your hospital rarely admits a stroke patient, say most of your patients come in through the ED and they're having a stroke and you transfer them out, there could be a potential that that patient would be admitted at some point. So it is appropriate or okay that you would select a stroke measure. And this is the case in which the zero denominator would be okay, just meaning that you would not have any patients that were admitted with a stroke during that reporting period. So let's talk a little bit about kind of the details of what it takes to produce a QRDA Category 1 file. So specifically for MEDITECH, there are several best practices that are required. Now, if you followed best practices several years ago when you were building your queries and your data capture at the beginning of meaningful use, some of that can still be used. However, it's important to know that with the CMS changes in the file format, the movement to the QRDA Category 1, there are numerous changes that are required by CMS. As a result, MEDITECH has released best practice documents with updated documentation, updated value sets, and nomenclature mapping. Now, it's important to also note that MEDITECH is constantly updating these documents. So I always say it's best, if you're going to make any type of changes within your system, it really is best to go to the MEDITECH website and reference the most recent documentation that's available for that measure. And another way that you can kind of keep up with the updates is to sign up to receive notifications on their change log for each specific measure. Secondly, as I mentioned, CMS has required lots of nomenclature mapping and value set changes. So MEDITECH has partnered with IMO. And at this point, they are strongly recommending that all customers move to IMO's new platform, the IMO 2.0 ETP. What this platform does is it will continually update all of your nomenclature mapping and value sets. So it really eases the process for hospitals not having to go in and manually make those changes. And there's more information on the MEDITECH website that I would encourage you to read about, and kind of the reasons why they're encouraging hospitals to consider that update. Now, lastly, let's talk about some of the ways that MEDITECH has available to produce the QRDA-1 file. First of all, MEDITECH has developed a tool. It's called the ARRA, or ARRA Report Manager. This tool is specifically used for facilities that don't have a SQL report writer internally, and the tool is very user-friendly. So what it will do is produce your QRDA files in the SQL format in the background. The other option is for those hospitals or facilities that have the capability to create the SQL reports. You can download certain tables and download a file that has all of the requirements needed to develop the SQL reports from MEDITECH. So each of these tools are used for populating the QRDA-1 measure. From there, you can generate or run the reports and determine if there's any type of data capture or nomenclature that is missing. You'll also be provided with errors or information to allow you to know what is missing, and then provide some guidance as far as the data sources or what needs to be corrected. So the big question is really, is it that easy? I will tell you, over the last year, I have worked with several clients through this process, and it is a very tedious and lengthy process, oftentimes very frustrating. So working through the ARRA Report Manager really requires a dedicated team of your internal staff resources or working with outside consultants, everyone kind of coming together to work through the process and work through the errors and making sure that everything is pointing to your data repository so that you're able to easily create these QRDA reports that will meet the CMS specification. Now, like I mentioned, the best practice documents have changed. So regardless of what you've done in the past, there are lots of new documentation queries that are required for the data capture as well as nomenclature mapping. I also want to point out that the specifications for 2017 changed. So even if you're well into this process and you successfully created your reports for 2016 reporting, there are numerous changes with value sets and some of the data capture that took place for 2017. So it's very important to go back and reference those best practices and make some changes potentially for the measures that you selected last year. Like I mentioned, there is also a new IMO mapping that's required, and this process can be, some of the burden can be eased a bit with the IMO platform that they are newly releasing. Again, CMS has released a new value set with new OIDs. So the big question, I guess, for hospitals and facilities to consider is, do you have the internal resources that can tackle this and manage the project that can go over several months? So let's talk about more specifics about MEDITECH'S ARRA tool, or the ARRA Report Manager. First, this tool is installed on the MEDITECH Data Repository server. If you've installed this before, you know that there is a configuration for last year's reporting, the 2016 configuration. However, that always uses the previous year's specifications. So what you want to do is run this year's configuration for 2017, but there'll be a drop-down menu where you will select the 2016 specifications. So just keep note that you're always going to be looking at the previous year's specs for the reporting period. There are also new value sets that need to be uploaded. This will require a license from the UMLS or the Value Set Authority Center website. This process can take 3 to 10 business days. So if someone has not obtained that license or those credentials in the past, it's important to start that process. And even if someone within your facility has had those credentials in the past, they require updating every year. I know I had to update mine prior to January 31st. So just keep in mind that those do expire if you don't actually go in and answer their survey questions and update your credentials. So those are 2 of the kind of initial steps with installing the ARRA Report Manager. Once that is all installed, then you can begin populating specific parameters. There are several that are specific to the hospital facility and internal, either the CIO or the CEO, someone within the C-suite who accepts responsibility for your quality reporting. The next step is to populate the parameters that are specific to each eCQM or each measure. And then once that's done, you can begin generating reports. So I want to talk about the report generation. So this is an example of some of the output that you would see. Now, this is an example from a report that was generated for 2016 reporting. And you'll see that there's an error that produced. So I had gone through the process of entering all of the parameters that I just spoke of. And then this error came back that said the report configuration table is not populated. So what I realized at this point is that there was something missing in the DR table, so it wasn't pulling in all of the required information. So the only way to remediate this was to simply reach out to MEDITECH, show them the error message, and then they were very helpful in correcting the problem fairly quickly. Now, what happens if there are any types of errors related to the configuration table or value sets, anything like that, you will be able to generate a report, but it won't show any patients in the population count. As you see, there are all zeros. However, here under populations, you can see that there's 234 charts that are out for final abstracting, and those are patients that should be falling into the denominator somewhere. So that way you know that it is pulling in some of the information for this particular measure, but there are issues within the DR table or mapping that have to be corrected before you'll be able to see your initial patient population. So I did want to just show you that example of an error report and discuss some of the ways that you can work through those issues. Now, once you have your QRDA file generated, using the ARRA Report Manager or just from SQL reports, the next step is to begin the validation and testing using QualityNet's testing tool. So this is commonly known as PSVA, or the Pre-Submission Validation Application. This is done through the QualityNet secure portal. So someone within the QualityNet or within the quality department, or someone internally that has credentials for QualityNet, that person is required for this process. So you have to first log into QualityNet using those credentials, and this is typically a person that has the assigned EHR data upload role. Again, someone within quality that typically has been, one who submits core measures in the past. So there are several steps to the pre-submission validation application. It is a web-based tool that needs to be installed on a specific computer. Once it's installed on that desktop, then you can begin the process of uploading files, going through the first step of validating the files through QualityNet. There can be errors that are produced through that step. So again, there will be some information that will let you know what error exists and what is needed to correct. And then the final step is the testing actual submitting test files to CMS. So let's talk about some of the common errors that could exist from that testing step. So the report that QualityNet or the PSVA will produce will show you a specific CMS error number, and it will reference exactly what that error is related to. So these are some of the, I guess, top 10 errors that were found during testing in 2016. A lot of errors that I found specific to admission date or discharge date, many of those related to the ED measures or some of the newborn measures that specifically had to have information related to admission and discharge, or, you know, for the newborns, the birth date and birth time. Another common error is not having the tax ID number entered correctly, or the CCN number, some of the facility-specific information. And then one other issue that's important to note, whenever you're submitting test files, the report has to be a full reporting quarter, so an actual designated CMS quarter. So if you're still testing for 2016, then it needs to be October 1st to December 31st. It has to be data for that full reporting quarter. So let's talk about just kind of the reality of what we're facing right now. So as the regulation currently stands for 2017, data tracking began on January 1st. So we're well into the first quarter of reporting. And what this means is, to meet CMS compliance, you needed to have your data in place starting January 1st with all of the components for your appropriate data capture. Like I mentioned, this involves a lot of new build and IMO mapping within your MEDITECH system, and also requires updates according to the new specifications for 2017 reporting. Again, going through the testing and validation steps with QualityNet using the PSVA tool. And then, as I mentioned, you can, for 2017, you can submit that information on a quarterly basis. So potentially, if you're ready, you could potentially submit this Q1 data in Q2. So I just wanted to note that, so that you can really be diligent in being prepared to start your reporting process and kind of stay on track throughout the year. Now, I know I've gone through a lot of information here. Many folks have already started this process and are very familiar with it. However, it is important to note, like I mentioned, that there are many changes for 2017. So it's kind of starting back at ground zero and going back and reviewing the best practices. I just thought that this was a really nice graphic, because through this process, even as a consultant, sometimes I feel like it's so stressful and there's so much work to be done, and I'm not on the hospital side. So it's just very important to know that no one does this alone, and it's important to have a team established, both with your alignment of your quality teams and your IT and whomever you can get together within your facility, so that everyone is kind of tackling the process together. So how can Iatric Systems help? Professional Services has been working with clients, like I mentioned, over the last year throughout this process. Some of the benefits of working with Iatric Systems is we have clinical expertise in the clinical quality measures, specifically in making workflows work to the best of the hospital culture, or what works best within your facility. So not only really identifying and helping discern the MEDITECH best practices, but also identifying and working with hospitals to figure out what the best workflow is for you. We are also experts in the CMS regulations and the eCQM requirements. Our teams also know MEDITECH. I will tell you that the technical consultants that I work with know MEDITECH, all platforms in their sleep. So it's always nice to have that resource and have the ability, say you're considering a MEDITECH upgrade. Some of this will change. MEDITECH will be able to cross over some of that information. Say you're going from Magic to 6X or 6.1. MEDITECH will be able to transfer some of that over, but some workflows will change. So that's where our consultants can be of assistance. Like I said, we know MEDITECH across all platforms. And then also, for years, customers have trusted Iatric systems with our Meaningful Use Manager product, and then now Analytics on Demand, all for quality reporting. So let's talk about professional services and our QRDA Assist offering. We work with hospitals to first select the 8 measures for 2017 reporting that are the most pertinent and applicable to your hospital facility. So oftentimes quality departments know what they would like to report or what data they would like, but realistically that may not be possible to implement with the IT workload. So we really work to align teams within your facility and help with making the decision of what measures are the best applicable and work within your workflow. We conduct a gap analysis of your current data collection and compare that to the most recent specifications for MEDITECH as well as CMS. We provide expert guidance for making those changes. So in the gap analysis report, we will provide the information for where you're not meeting up to the best practices, but then also provide recommendations for remediation with a direct reference to the best practice document. So you really have direction in where to go, knowing what needs to be done. We also work with your teams to go through the process in MEDITECH'S ARRA report manager to generate the QRDA files. And then at that point, we work with the quality team directly to validate and test those files using QualityNet's tool. This will give you the ability to quickly generate your QRDA files from your MEDITECH system. And many hospitals work with quality vendors such as Truven, Quantros, Press Ganey, just to name a few. What we do is help you produce those QRDA files so that you have something packaged up, ready to go to provide over to that quality vendor. So just a bit about why it's important to kind of get on board, stay on track. I know a lot of hospitals are kind of sitting back and with our new administration, it's, you know, let's just sit back and wait and see, or let's wait until the new proposal in the spring comes out. The bottom line is we really can't bank on that because what's at stake is really huge. So it is okay to, you know, kind of take a deep breath and, you know, say, okay, well, we can anticipate that there could be some changes, but you don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket to bank on that. In the 2016 final rule that was released in August, the penalties that hospitals now face if they don't participate in the hospital IQR program, you're facing a 1/4 reduction of the market basket update. So that could be very significant if you don't participate in IQR. But not only that, hospitals will also face a 3/4 reduction of the market basket update if you don't participate in the Meaningful Use EHR program. So that really can equate to millions of dollars for hospitals who have large Medicare claims. So it really is important to, you know, be diligent, stay on track with your projects, and, you know, just stick to the regulations as we know it today. And then just know that if CMS releases anything different, then it's kind of a bonus and you're well ahead of the game so that you can focus time on other projects. Again, as I mentioned, there are numerous workflow changes and the new value set mapping updates that CMS has released, and there are strict deadlines. So it all comes down to our quality reporting equates to significant money. Now, that's not incentive money. That's, at this point, even bigger than that, the penalties that you can face for not participating in the programs. So lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about how you can make quality reporting work within your facility. I mentioned a bit, it is super important to have alignment of your teams internally, starting with your C-suite, quality departments, IT departments, all of the alignment of teams so that there's really no silo of teams anymore. Unfortunately, where we're headed with quality reporting and value-based purchasing, we have to all get on the same page. And from there, those processes are established that have to be educated and passed on to the clinicians and physicians in the front line. So that requires appropriate training of your staff. This will always require some type of workflow change or new documentation within your MEDITECH system. And what this does is begins to establish or implement continuous quality improvement. Specifically, it's important to focus on quality reporting that works for your specific hospital or within your hospital culture. Now, I just wanted to mention something. I always like to reference kind of what's happening in the real world. So I was recently reading an article written by an anonymous nurse, and it really kind of brought home what we currently face. As a previous clinical bedside nurse myself, I know that, you know, the focus and why I went into nursing, it was important for me to take care of patients and to help make them better. At that time, you know, that was and should continue to be the goal. Unfortunately, what we're facing now is the requirements with CMS and EHR documentation. It's oftentimes focused more on that, or nurses are now faced with having to spend much of their time with documentation to meet these quality reporting requirements. So as I mentioned, the article I was reading was written by a nurse who had a leadership role in a very large teaching hospital. And because of the quality initiatives and all of the changes with EHR documentation, it was just getting to the point where she felt like she was no longer making a difference with her patient care, and her goals and her reasons for being a nurse were shifting. So she thought that moving on to a smaller community hospital would help her to better align her personal goals professionally. So reading on in the article, she goes on to discuss how, you know, she was a cardiac ICU nurse, and working within this facility, she needed to, you know, she was very excited to bring her experience from the big teaching hospital to the smaller community hospital. However, once she got into there, she realized it was not any less stressful, looking at higher patient and staff ratios. Oftentimes, those patient acuities were not taken into account. And so all the time focusing on taking care of very sick cardiac patients was her primary focus, but there was also this requirement for the documentation and making sure that she was documenting appropriately to meet the quality initiatives. So I thought that it was very applicable to what clinicians face in the real world. Is we are there, you know, essentially the patient is the reason we're there. Patients equate to revenue for the hospital. However, you know, with looking at quality documentation and requirements now, that is what we have to really focus on. So it is super important to make sure that we're providing the appropriate training and staff providing the appropriate training to our staff, but also making sure that we're really being diligent in evaluating what's important within the hospital culture and how we can meet all of those goals. So bottom line is, we all have gone into this to take care of patients and to make them better. That has to remain the primary focus, but how can we meet the quality requirements and the government requirements at the same time? So that's just kind of my soapbox that I wanted to end on. And here I've provided some different resources, links for each of the websites that you can reference for CMS and looking at your eCQM reporting. Also, the eCQI, the healthit.gov website is very beneficial, and then also a link for directly to QualityNet. So with that, I would just like to turn it over to Chris. Do we have any questions?
We do. And just a reminder, you can, if you have a question, you may enter it in the questions section of your control panel. The first one is CCN number. Where and how is this found? MEDITECH is sending information to me that is actually the ONC certification ID. Is the CCN number truly a 6 to 10 digit number?
That is correct. If you reference the cover page that you've used in the past, that you received in the past for your meaningful use attestation, the CCN number is listed on that cover page. So it's not the ONC certification number is the number for that the chapel issues for your MEDITECH, your different versions that you're running in MEDITECH. So the CCN number is different, and you can find that on that attestation cover page that you've received in years previous with your previous attestations.
Okay, and then you mentioned the reporting period for quality measures, but can you please clarify what specifically happens when I test for meaningful use and also submit for the IQR program?
Sure. Let me just go back to that slide. Okay, so for 2017, the requirement is to report for a full calendar year. Now, to submit that data, you can submit the 4 quarters either on a quarterly basis, a biannual basis, or just wait and submit all of the data for 1 year at the end. So that would be next February. So this meets the requirement for the IQR reporting. Now, the confusing part is, in order to submit your data for the Meaningful Use EHR Incentive Program, that is simply one single attestation that you submit by February 28th of the following year. So it is somewhat confusing, but what happens is when you go to a test for the EHR Incentive Program, there will simply be a question that says, did you submit your IQR data or did you submit CQMs electronically through QualityNet? You'll simply check yes that you did that, and then that will meet the requirement for the dual submission for both IQR and the EHR Incentive Program. Thank you, Chris.
Sure. A couple more questions regarding errors. One of the submissions says our submission resulted in 360 plus pages of the error. The NPI should have a correct checksum using the LUN algorithm. What does this mean? Okay, so that is a difficult error to correct, unfortunately. I have encountered that, and it has to do with your facility NPI number is not entered correctly within your MEDITECH system. So unfortunately, it is an issue that MEDITECH will have to correct for you. However, you'll need to just double check with your billing department and make sure that
it's not going to affect any of your billing submission that's required on that side.
And then a similar question from another person. I'm getting an error regarding NPI length and check digit. Is this the hospital NPI we should be sending, and does it only go in the legal entity field?
Yes, it is if you're referencing the report, the ARRA report manager parameter for that, the NPI number is listed under the legal entity, yes, and it is specific to your hospital facility. So you want to enter that number exactly as it appears on the legal documentation for your facility. And again, this is another number that you can obtain off of your attestation cover page.
All right.
Any other questions?
That's all that I see.
Okay. Great. Well, feel free, if you have other questions that you think of later, feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is listed, and I'd be happy to communicate with you on a one-to-one basis. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining today.
And we do want to thank everyone for attending our webinar today. And as I mentioned earlier, you will have the opportunity to fill out a short survey, and we really appreciate you taking the time to do this. This survey will appear when you leave the webinar, and for your time, your name will be entered into a drawing to win a $100 Amazon gift card. And just as a reminder, all those drawings will be held at the end of the month. Follow us on social media and our blogs for healthcare IT updates and to interact with your peers. And if you'd like more information, please contact your Iatric Systems account executive, or you can send an email to Cindy or to info@iatric.com. I'd like to thank Cindy. I'd also like to once again thank everyone who took the time to join us. We hope you have a great day, and this concludes our webinar.